For today's presentation, we're going to cover some of the basics of growing annual forages. We'll talk a little bit about the different cool and warm season annual forages that are available, some of the cultural practices in getting these established and growing well, then also a little bit about multiple cropping of different annual forages. There is a good number of different species and varieties available, but I think it's very important that you carefully choose those that you know have been proven to be used in your area before or fit your specific needs or soil conditions and those types of things. The first group to talk about is going to be the cool season annuals. These are typically spring seeded and includes things like oats, spring triticale, spring barley, field peas, several other legumes, Italian or annual ryegrass. Now, sometimes people have asked me about the use or the planting of winter wheat or winter rye or winter triticale in the spring. And basically, this was because of a lack of the availability of other types of more commonly seeded spring forages. Generally, those winter annuals like the rye, wheat, or triticale, they will grow when spring planted, but typically the production from them is rather minimal because in most cases they aren't able to go through the fertilization process. Now, some of these listed here, we often see some combinations or mixtures of these planted. The photo illustrates an oats and a field pea mixture. The general planting date for the spring cool season annuals can be mid-March to about mid-April. I like to see those soil temperatures at about at least 43 degrees Fahrenheit. They can be planted a bit later, but of course we do usually see less production with those later plantings. I encourage you to check with your seed supplier or local extension office related to the specific seeding rates that you could use. For fertilization, typically, of course, we do like to see soil tests for a detailed, a more exact estimate of what those nutrient needs might be. In general, I've seen typically 50 to 75 pounds of nitrogen per acre for some of those irrigated small grains or those in higher rainfall areas. As in all cases, when we're trying to grow a good crop, some of the basic things as far as the field preparation, the drill calibration, and the planting depth are all very important. One of the more common spring seeded forages would be oats, and I've got some data going back a number of years from our location here in North Platte, Nebraska, where we've had oat variety test plots in place. This includes multiple varieties of forage oats that are available, and typically each year these plots received about 70 pounds of nitrogen per acre. But overall, you can see we have averaged about 3 tons of dry matter production per acre from our different oat plots that we had in place. There is some variability from year to year. It does appear that depending on the spring conditions, particularly temperature can have a bit of an impact on how tall those oat varieties grow and ultimately how much production that they will have. The forage quality of the various small grains out there can be relatively good. Of course, the key factor in determining forage quality is the stage of maturity of that plant. In terms of small grains that are grazed during the spring, we typically start grazing when they reach a height of about 5 to 6 inches, and you would expect very high protein and high digestibility levels of that stage of growth. For those that are used as or cut as, this table here just shows some protein and TDN data for the 5 different ones shown on the previous slide. And we can see crude protein levels ranging from about 11.5% up to a little over 14% for the barley and the spring wheat. TDN or total digestible nutrients, you can see the range there from the upper 50s to the lower 60s. These two would have been harvested at a late mill to an early soft dough stage, which is typically the recommended stage of growth to be harvested for hay. At that point, you generally do see the maximum yield of hay as well as moderately good forage quality. The next group of forages includes the warm season annuals. These are typically late spring or early summer planted. It includes the millets, which has both grazing and hay types. There's sorghum Sudan grass hybrids, straightforward sorghum Sudan grass, and then even things like crabgrass, teff, or forage corn. Several legumes are available out there that are ideally suited for the warmer parts of the summer. The photo does illustrate that on the left is a brown midrib forage sorghum, and on the right is a conventional forage sorghum leaf. That brown midrib is just a marker for the trait of higher digestibility and is available on several of the straight forage sorghums as well as the sorghum Sudan grass hybrids. For the warm season annuals, in general, the planting date we're looking at a mid-May to August. Like to see those soil temperatures at least about 60 degrees Fahrenheit. So they do like those warm soils and warm growing conditions. And again, for seeding rates, check with your seed supplier or your local extension office. Fertilization in general, again, roughly 40 to 80 pounds of nitrogen is required, particularly if we have irrigation available and are irrigating those annual forages. The range of dry matter yields for the summer annuals looks something like this, with these taller growing things like the Sudan grass, sorghum Sudan hybrids, or forage sorghum, pearl millet, or anywhere from about 4 to over 5 tons per acre of dry matter production. For things like the foxtail millet and teff, which are shorter, finer stem plants, looking anywhere from 2.5 to almost 4 tons per acre. I want to talk just a little bit about planting date. These photos here just illustrate some different and later planting dates that we had. In this photo here, we had this set of plots planted on July 11th, and it's just showing what they look like 48 days later at the end of August. And from left to right, the three plots include a teff, a white wonder, foxtail millet in the middle, and a sorghum Sudan hybrid on the right. In this photo, we have a late July planting, and it is also taken 48 days later after that date, so the date of the photo is September 13th. And again, we do see some real nice growth from that later planting of these warm season annuals. The yields from those two different planting dates. You can see on July 11th planting, the September yield was 4 tons per acre, a little over 4 for the sorghum Sudan, and nearly 2.5 for both the white wonder, foxtail millet, and the teff. In that late July planting, again, we were pretty respectable in terms of the yields. Again, almost 4 tons per acre for the sorghum Sudan hybrid, and 2.3 to 2.8 for the teff and foxtail millet. The other time of planting that can be important for some of the annuals includes those that are put in summer or late summer seeded, and we're specifically thinking about fall and winter forage. Well, for this, those that we normally typically think of as being planted in the spring, things like the oats, barley, and spring triticale, they can also be planted mid to late summer and do quite well. In addition, things like field peas and also, of course, turnips, oilseed radishes, or other brassicas are often included in these mixtures. Again, always thinking about what we could do for our fall forage. In general, the planting date with these is mid-July through August into early September in some cases. You do have to keep in mind, though, with those later planting dates, we're probably going to be looking at yield reduction. In some cases, winter wheat, winter rye, or winter triticale can typically plant those in September, but I've seen some trials where we put these in a bit earlier in the summer to try to get more fall growth from them. And it does work fairly well, but typically, again, with those winter annuals, we're mostly thinking about forage for the following spring. For those fall and winter forage needs, using the forage cocktail or the cover crop mixtures is also a very common practice, as these mixtures contain usually both the cool seasons that I just talked about, as well as some warm season annuals in there. And I think particularly if we are getting or able to have an earlier planting date, say into the mid to the latter part of July, including warm seasons in there, can certainly be a good idea to increase that forage production. This early October photograph just shows several different cool season small grains as well as annual ryegrass, what they look like in early October after that August 13th planting date. That particular set of plots had some spring triticale, a couple of different oat varieties, barley, a spring wheat, and two different annual ryegrasses. At the end of October, when they were harvested, you'll notice that we had some really nice production, anywhere from 3 to 4, over 4 tons for the small grains. The winter wheat that we also had included in there, early planting date of August 13th, did make almost 2.5 tons of dry matter forage production. The ryegrasses, annual ryegrasses, they did about 1.5 tons of production. In general, for our central Nebraska conditions, we do like to see the cool season annuals planted by at least September 1st in order to produce significant fall forage. And with those warm seasons, I generally use the rule of thumb that try to get those in before August 10th to produce an adequate amount of fall forage. Well, and lastly, these two figures here illustrates a couple of different double cropping options with annual forages. On the left, we might have a field that had rye planted the previous fall, and then it was grazed out during the spring, typically would be finishing up in May. Immediately after that rye was grazed out, a sorghum sudan grass could be planted, and typically, if the date were June 1st, probably about 40 to 45 days after planting, that sorghum sudan grass would be ready for grazing, and depending on the stocking, of course, could carry livestock all the way into September. On the right is another example using late March or early April planted oats. That oats would last or could be support grazing until late June or early July, and then still even in July after that oats were done, something like a sorghum sudan grass, a warm season annual, could be planted and utilized up into the fall. For more information on this topic, please visit our extensionpubs.unl.edu website or the beef.unl.edu website. Also on the beef website are a couple of companion webinars on this topic. One is called Grazing Annual Forages, and the second is Planting Annual Forage Systems.